Okay, so I decided to preemptively make this video a little earlier than I said I would. Basically, I'm gonna cover the minimal steps in this video to use a Debian live build to make your own Debian based distro that you can burn onto a USB key and boot on your computer. Now, what won't be covered in this first video, if it does end up becoming part of a series, will be things like persistent storage, customizing the actual distro itself further down, and all those sort of things. I'm just going to give you a very basic how to get a bootable version going. So the very first steps, something you would start with no knowledge or minimal knowledge. So one day you'll end up with something like this, not too far from now. Well, let's dive into it before anything else. First thing to cover is we are using Debian Live Build. Now I've got this in Google here for a reason, because that straight search result will take you to the manual, and that's where we're going to start. So, first thing, installation, requirements, etc. So, requirements, pretty much a system. Now, you won't actually need to worry about that, because you've obviously already got your mounts done. You will need to run this, and this is where we're going to start pretty much installing live build. So, before anything, there are two ways I could do this, and I'm going to quickly cover this because this is something you should pay attention with when doing it later on with your actual distro itself. Basically, you have the option of installing live build like that, and because I cannot remember off the top of my head, we will search it. apt no recommends. So this will install everything that's required dependency wise, along with the recommended packages. So you can do things like this here. Basically, you want the flag like this here, no recommends. That's if you want minimal installation. The reason why I'm explaining this is basically when you're building your distro, you want to understand the dependencies and recommends and suggestions for packages. Now, before we install live build, which I've already got it installed, so you'll see that when I do, we're going to go have a look at the actual package itself. Live build here. I'll explain the search later on. So we can see that it will depend on and install the bootstrap, basically. That's regardless if we do the no recommends, which I suggested. So if we were to copy that and do that, that would only install this. These blue ones will not be installed, and suggests generally will not be installed unless you actually say install suggests. Now, breaking that down, basically what you realistically need to get it working would be this here. Now, password in. I've already got them all installed, so I don't need it. There are 3 items in that list that technically my system doesn't need, and I'm not actually using. That's the where are they? They're not listed on there, but they were in the dependency check. Color diff, unzip, and rename. Anyway, we're going to dive in now. So let's just say we've installed our live build. We won't worry about the virtual machine or anything. We're just going to jump straight into doing a build. So, very first thing I think we'll do is we'll create a directory where we're going to do our work. So we have our part 1 folder, nothing special. I've just created it and I've put it in my opt directory for optional software that doesn't really have a standard as such, or at least that's a layman's way to think of it. So now that we're in our thing, all we need to do to really test this, set up a config, which has been done. Now this will give you a standard template with a Debian 11 without a desktop manager or any other stuff around it. So, if I'm not mistaken, that could actually probably run already. What we'll do is we will build it, and you need sudo for this one. I'll demonstrate without. Now this build will probably take maybe up to 2 minutes. It really depends. I did build it earlier, obviously to test all the steps to make sure I remember everything. And I do have an apt cache running, which I will cover in another video at some point. Basically the benefit of the apt cache is I can not have to worry about downloading the same packages again and again. Now if I was to bring over an example of the apt cache, I'll show you what I save. So recent, or since startup for today, I've only had to fetch 66 meg worth of packages, and my cache has served up 2.7 gig, so no download times apart from 66 meg. And in about the last week or so, I've only had to download 283 meg, and it's served up 9. Later on I'll cover how that's used, but for now you don't need to worry about that. Yeah. So where did we continue from the Debian live manual? I should have covered that. Let's go to examples. Now we'll pretty much come in here and it will say to do a default image. So what we've done is created a directory, we've gone into the directory, and we've created our configuration. That's it. That gives you the template that was here. Now you'll notice this is slowly expanding, files are being added as it's building. And don't worry about these firmwares, that's all basically stuff you enable later on for different devices. So you may see errors, missing items, etc., but that is normal. The main thing is whether your builds or not, and then obviously testing, etc., and making sure what you've included is compatible with each other. So getting back to it, that will create your configuration, which is pretty much the auto and the config. You can examine as it says, blah blah blah. You could dump the build to a log, but well, we've got a terminal here. If it crashes, we're going to see it in the terminal. That's just if you need to. So long story short, all they've suggested to do is create your directory, run the config, and run the build. That's all there is to making a base Debian distro with live build. Live build. Now technically it's not a unique distro, it is just a Debian copy of Debian's 11 distro. Don't quote me on this, but the definition of distros or flavors, variants, basically comes down to, it should have a different desktop look, theme, purpose, contents, etc. It should be tailored. It shouldn't just be a copy of Debian with one item added or removed. So anyway, that's our build done. 2 to 3 minutes maybe it was. Now we are pretty much going to test that straight away. That's a working copy. If you notice here, we have our ISO. Now it is a total of 260 megabytes. If we were to do that there, we can also just quickly check it's in the same build directory, but it's done. If you need it, you can obviously chmod your from the root to whatever you need to, but let's get around to testing it now. So you will need to install, I can't even remember the pronunciation, QEMU, whichever one it is, that there. Now, getting back to the package search, let's go back. This page here is great for searching your packages, so you can start chasing your dependencies and looking down how you need to. Let's paste in what we have. And we found the one for Bullseye Stable. Now you can swap between your versions here, so you go back or forward. So Bullseye is known as stable at the moment, there, and Bookworm is testing / unstable. which I believe is on the same level as SID. Now SID will always stay the same, and so Bullseye will become the new stable, and then there'll be another name that will fall into where Bullseye is, but SID will always be SID/the future release. So anyway, you can see here's your dependencies, here's your description. Basically it's a virtual machine, package, library, blah, that's going to allow us to do our job. Now, don't quote me on this, but you may need to instead, well, I prefer to use the KVM package. Now I think in this case it will default to the one I've suggested, or I just won't find it, but let's go there. So I've got that installed now. Now if I'm not mistaken, that will install KVM, or you can just replace the command that I'm using with, I'm going to type it, because this is how we're going to launch our VM. That command there will give you a 64-bit version of your machine. Anyway, we're going to fire it up. So here's the command I use. Let's just adjust this over so you can see it fully. So what we're loading is the KVM, which should basically automatically enable the KVM speedups. Google anything you're not sure about. The CD-ROM argument will load the ISO in. SMP will give us 12 of our cores. CPU will use the same type as our host. And then we're adding a device for the GPU along with 16 gig of RAM, and we are making sure the real-time clock is working. So here is the bootloader for Sys Linux, I believe it is, or ISO Linux. This isn't Grub. And you have the option of running, utilities, but basically you'll boot normally. Now you're not going to have a UI here, you're just going to have a command line interface. But you've already got a working virtual machine. Debian release on a virtual machine. Not really much I'm going to show you in here because there's not really much in here. We can see what, commands are installed, etc. So that's it. I don't even know if this will work. Yeah. Now I'm not expecting it to auto quit the virtual machine because it doesn't have any of the libraries and all that. But long story short, you've got a bootable copy. Alright, let's move on to what I would effectively call step 4, which will be creating a desktop on it, and then we'll go through and swap that desktop and enable it. i386. So the desktop we're going to start off with is LXDE. Now there's a lot of packages, so we're just going to start with what it actually is, and it'll be that one there, desktop. And I'm just going through this so you get to the habit and you understand what I'm grabbing and why. So we're going to install this here and have a read. I already know what it is. What it's going to install by default, what it will also include, because we are letting use the recommends at the moment. Later on, in another video, I'll show you how to turn off these recommends so you can have a lightweight build without all the bloat. So, how do we get to this step now and adding these packages from the manual? So, pretty much all we've done was build our, let's go to it. We did our build, and as they comment here, the ISO is available. I've shown you how to launch it into your VM and test it. That's that. So, following on with the tutorial, we're going to add a package. Now we're not going to use Iceweasel because I believe Iceweasel is not available or it's not showing as a dependency. Anyway, we're just going to go minimal, so we're only going to use this one here. That's highlighted in the tutorial as well. And we'll even take the command, just for the sake of convenience. But we'll take Iceweasel out. Now, before we execute that, just so you can see what it's going to do, we're going to go into config, packages list. You can see it. and that will create a mylist.chroot with the contents of that. Now what we'll probably do is call this something like distro base. It doesn't matter about the naming of the file, just the extension. So it's going to be .list.chroot to be picked up, and that stuff is also covered in the manual. The manual is actually very useful if you spend a bit of time reading it and going through the sections. So we have a look here. I need to drag it over because I default into another window. That's all we've got in there, nothing else, just a file that tells it what to use. So we'll close it up for a moment. What do we do now to make that work is the question. Nothing, we basically build. Now you may need to clean depending on what you've done, but cleaning is a process I'll explain further in another video. Just so you know what it is, it's that there. So let's go with sudo lb build and test it. Now if you have a broken configuration, sometimes it's just easier to do a full clean, which basically means deleting everything except for the base config and the cache, although I delete the cache at times. And by the way, there we go, we've now added LXDE to our distro. So we just push up on the console. By the way, in your terminal, up and down will go through your history, so you know, see me being lazy. Let's test this out. Now, this is what I mean. So, nothing's happened, right? But going by the tutorial, it should. Tells us to do that. So we follow the same steps as before. The difference is, though, the lb config. They're resetting. They're starting from scratch. Like, this is a different tutorial, not a revision. The revision will possibly cover that. So, easiest way to get around this, and probably just a good way to build until you're familiar with the build flow itself, is to do a combination of your commands. Let me just grab a copy and paste for it. So let's go with this command here. First thing it will do is clean, then it will do a config, and then it will do a build. Now the config doesn't need a sudo, and it should not delete our distro base list chroot file. So let's clean it and rebuild it. Okay, so the number one recommendation is if something fails on your build, make sure you do a clean. And if you're in doubt, let me show you. The only thing you want left is those two folders. Everything else will get rebuilt. Your chroot gets generated, your cache gets generated, your local, etc. The build, all that can disappear as long as you keep your auto on config to save, you know, deleting this file, for example. If you're generating it all from a script, delete the whole folder and rebuild. And if you've still got the error, then that means you've got a conflict, more or less. But we'll let this continue. Won't take long. Guess while we're here, we can go through a few other little things, but let's go back to the top of the manual. What useful sections do we have? Okay, about the manual, terms maybe. The project, if you want to know the background, installation, well, we've pretty much covered that already. Live boot and config, you would install those two locally to your machine if you want to use the examples from the projects. They are automatically added to the build, So if we look in our live list chroot, you can see they're already in there. So you don't need to worry about adding those. You only install them locally if you wish to have the examples in your user share doc folder, etc. Something you can Google. Continuing on, the basics. Well, we've done that. We're going to do that, and I will try to cover it through the manual and remember the actual steps that they show. But I'm going to use DD, don't know if that's what I recommend. Virtual machine testing, well, we're pretty much already there. Building a hard drive, I'm going to show you just a one-line command to generate a quick one and how to quickly attach it to the machine, even though we won't have an installable version today. Network, we're not going to worry about. Web booting, we will not worry about. Overview of tools. Now, I'll quickly open the clean just as an example. And it doesn't actually give us a decent description of this manual, but that's where we would do LB clean into Google. Find a manual. You can do man, but I'm keeping my terminal. And then here you can see the different stages that you would run on the LB clean. So you'd run, you know, LB clean space dash dash chroot, etc. So it's a good idea for you to get used to how to clean your project depending on what you're building. There are different stages of the build, and you know, cover them slowly as we go. Anyway, let's exit out of that, go back. Probably won't have enough time to cover all this before that's done. So there's your you know, general information about the three main commands you're going to use, which is config, clean, build. Managing configuration. Now that will go through the auto scripts. I won't cover that at the moment. Probably something you'll read in your own as you get used to the setup, or I'll cover it in another video. It's basically just extending how these package lists work and things like that. Customizing contents. Now before we get into that, you'll see here we're at the point of building the file system. So it's already downloaded and done a majority of its work. It will build the file system, and then it will run any additional install chroot and stuff on top of that, if I'm not mistaken. So we're probably about 80% mark, I'd guess. Alright, customizing. So this explains the build time versus boot time configurations, which can come down to something as simple as, I think it was, yeah, like the binary in the chroot. So, but boot time configurations are also hooks, things like that. We're not going to worry about it too much. Cover it another time or read it on your own. There are multiple stages. This is very customizable. You will enjoy it. Customizing package installations. Now, to summarize some of this, a package source, basically you add the mirrors, you can just then add into our, let's go back to it. Let's just say we had Google Chrome stable. Now that requires a repo, so that was added. You would then be able to use that in there. So choosing packages to install. Now this goes through the package lists, which is exactly what I was explaining, and meta packages, which are what we use in the tasks dash ones. But our VM is ready, so launch away. Now as you can see, I'm only using two commands. I'm just pushing up and up, or up enter each time. And here's our first desktop, LXDE. She's a little ugly, but she's there and she's working. Now, this is all the junk that gets installed by the recommends, and that's the sort of stuff I'll explain later. So let's just show that it's even working with the network, if my network is enabled by default on this. So test, search, Chrome app. There we go. Internet connection's working on it and everything. Let's see, I haven't actually used this desktop for a while, so you have to forgive me. Yeah, that helps if I do it right. So there's your bootable LXDE Debian 11 desktop. Do we have a about? What's this? So that's a user one. Sorry, I'm actually just exploring this because it's been so long since I've opened this one. System tools, accessories. Anyway, I'm not going to worry about exploring it. That's working. How big's our ISO now? So our ISO now is grown to 1 gigabyte. Our whole build folder, by the way, you'll want to just sort of keep an eye on space. I'm going to guess is about 5 to 6 gig. 6 gig. Yep. Anyway, that's a working one. We're going to quickly do one last set of things, and then we will actually put it onto a USB key. So next step we're going to do is change over the desktop to GNOME, just so you know how quick and easy that is. So we go into our config, packages list here, and we're going to change that to that. That's it. Push up twice, hit enter, rebuild, run. Nothing else. I generally do a clean just because it's easier. I can't remember what the default clean does effectively, but I'm pretty sure any package change needs a clean unless you're adding it from scratch. Anyway, while that's running, we'll quickly just resume this and I'll show you the one other step we want to do. First revision. Now we will apply this and we'll actually cancel the build as a good example. So say you're doing what I'm doing, editing while you're building, you change your mind, just hit Control C. She should exit safely. All the build that was going on does stop. Sometimes it'll take a little while, and if this has stopped at a bad time, again, make sure you do a clean. I really can't emphasize the amount of times the LB clean will actually save you. So anyway, we're going to do this first revision. What that will do is give us the 32-bit architecture available, and we'll also do it so it basically means no older machines are going to be used. Long story short, this contents here, we'll do a manual way. We're going to put into a file, if I'm not mistaken, in here called config. If I spelled that right, doesn't look right from here. Done. Now I'll show you a page on all these options later. This is pre-configuring the config when it generates now. So as you can see, we're going to rerun that. But that's all we've done. So we're resuming our build again. Oh, sorry, restarting our build again. We're still going to have GNOME, the new desktop, in there. But we're also including support for 32-bit. Now, don't worry about the git commit stuff unless you actually plan on building a repo. But you know, they include that in there just for good habits. I do that with my own builds. So yeah. Now we are pretty much done with this page. The only differences of the second revision is about adding VLC. So if you look, we just put VLC in the same package if we want, or we can create another file. I will do it, but I won't worry about compiling it. Go to config, packages list. Let's just copy that one and call it Distro apps would be a better name. And that's it. VLC will be available if you were to rerun the build. I believe it's actually probably already installed anyway, so I think the point is null in this one. But that's enough to get you going on that page, so we're done there. This page, sorry I had up just to remind you, is a good way to browse through what's available. So can't remember where the desktop ones are, but if you want to go GNOME apps, etc., one of these categories will lead you into the desktop environments that are available. You want to also know what's available. You could just, search desktop or task dash, etc. But we're going to leave that there. Now, continuing from here, while that's doing our last build, and this will be our last build, choosing packages to install. So local binaries, generated packages, lists, metas, etc. That's what we were covering before. Modified third-party packages. So packages chroot from memory is a directory that you drop your .deb files into, and it will automatically install them during the build process. That simple. So if you've got a custom build of a deb or a repackage of a package, that's the place to put it. Or if you want to download them in there for some reason. Add your repositories for the custom software. I think I discussed that earlier up. And custom packages with APT. I believe that will cover maybe versioning. Choosing APT or aptitude. Yeah, APT. Proxy. That will be covered in possibly video 2 or 3 when we put an ATP cache in place, which I'm already running. So you're not re-downloading these files every time. Again, it's a big convenience. So if I was to bring over that same page again, you can see it's probably increased. I don't actually know what the original figure was, but again, save your build time a lot, because that is probably the biggest delay. My final AngryOS build at the moment is about 20 to 30 minutes from memory, from a complete clean build as I do. So yeah. Tweaking APT to save space, basically removing the recommends, passing options, controlling items like that. Pinning, Franken Debian is one way to search this. Basically, it's the ability to mix your stable, unstable, and other versions. I am applying what I believe a safe, modified, acceptable version of this, which only allows future items when they're specified specifically, so it won't use it unless you tell it to. This one here you will want to read. Customizing contents, or starting from here, pretty much these, possibly this. So the live chroot, what happens during the boot / the installed version of your distro when you do install it. Debian installer, you'll definitely want to, that's how we install it to a hard drive, another video. Runtime behaviors, basically how to customize things like your user, the locale, enabling the persistence, those sort of things. So consider that contents, that more so settings. Binary image, basically what's available on the ISO, which, yeah, won't need to cover too much. Debian installer, and then back to the examples and things like that. So, for example, the example I was on, these 2 basic lines. But I believe we are done with that for now. One suggestion though, read up on this. DD. I'll leave that there for a moment because we're going to use that in a moment. Now, relaunch our VM. We should have GNOME instead of LXDE. Just give it a moment. Now there are no drivers or any of that sort of stuff, so this is just running basically raw. So, the same deal, we'll load up Firefox, this time in GNOME desktop. And working, as you'd expect. Now, performance, I wouldn't expect anything great until you start doing drivers and all that sort of stuff. But hopefully this video should even give you enough information to start Googling what you need. But, you know, let's just do one quick Google before we put it to the USB, and because we're wrapping up now anyway. So let's go Debian, live build, and we'll go, you know, found a good straight up the top useful page, reliable source. Tells you how to create a hard drive there. That's one way. And that one is probably perfectly fine. I'm just going to use the FLK. But yeah, you know, different architectures, tells you how to run your... So it's not hard to find the information when you need. Now, pretty much the final step is putting this to a USB. So let's list our current ones. Fdisk. Forgive me, I cannot remember the commands. So we got a NVM, SDA, SDB, SDC, right? Looking at our USB key. And we should have an SDA in a minute. No, SDE. Okay. That's interesting because I normally get SDA, but anyway. We will use DD to copy this over now. Now I am actually going to do the very smart and safe thing and confirm what hard drive that is, just to make sure. So if I, yep, SDE to confirm. So this command, basically the input file or source, which is going to be our ISO, the output, which is going to be our device. We're not going to use any partitions because we're doing a raw write straight to it. Our byte size, in my case, for USB 3, I use about 8 meg. And status progress, so we can actually see what's going on. That there will not always give a progress, by the way, funny enough. That, or I've written it wrong, so maybe the double byte space. Anyway, we're going to let that run for a bit. And that's pretty much copying it to a USB key. Once that command is done, it will remount the device, or unmount the device, whichever one, the USB, and it'll be pretty much ready to take out and boot from. So hopefully this covers enough on how to do it. There you go, already done. And you know, if you like it, definitely give me a like and subscribe, and I will start a second video. So before we go, let's just change this device over. So instead of the ISO, we're using our USB key. But obviously we need access because it's a lower level. But look what's there. A bootable Debian 11 running GNOME from the USB key. Now if you take all these steps and run them, you know, through a script or whatever, it won't take you long at all. You know, 10-minute build for a basic one. Once you start customizing it, you know, your builds may be up to an hour. Really depends what you're doing, how you do it, and what stages you do it. So, you know, things like flat plaque and all that sort of stuff will slow it down, but yeah. Otherwise, I think I'm going to leave it there, and let me know what you think in the comments. Hopefully this was of use to a few people. If not, you know, Google's got plenty of information out there. Alright, thanks people, catch us next time.